Hello everyone, and welcome back to the next chapter here in the Building Holistic Life series on Coastal Trails Media. And today what we're going to do is we're going to do a deep dive into dealing with fear and how to get over them in order to be able to accomplish all the things that it is that you want to do. So let's dive into it. So first things first, I want to say a big thank you for coming back here to Coastal Trails Media, where we hope to inspire and educate people on how to build the life that it is that they want, where they can be comfortable and accomplish exciting things that makes them feel fulfilled. And so in today's chapter, we're going to be talking about something that affects each and every single one of us, as I am a strong believer in the fact that there is nobody on this planet who isn't afraid of something. So the truth is that everyone is scared of something. And I've been asked over and over, how am I not afraid to attempt something that could potentially kill me? And the truth is that most of the time I am afraid. I'm scared. I'm terrified. But I don't ever want to let that stop me from experiencing all the things that I want in my life. So it begs the question, how do I do it? And is that something that other people can do as well? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And so before we get into actually the three-step system of how to get over fears and how to face them, I want to talk a little bit about the three general categories that pretty much every single fear will fit into. So the first large category is the unknown. And I would say that the fear of the unknown actually affects each and every single one of us in one way or another, whether that's being afraid of the dark, or being afraid of the open ocean, or being afraid of the future. It's why suspense horror movies work so well, because we don't know what's coming and our imagination will always take us to the worst case scenario. These worst case scenarios are oftentimes way exaggerated and likely not based on some sort of factual information or data that we've collected throughout our lives, but rather we could expect to happen based on the situation. I think a lot of people are scared of the dark, and it's the perfect example of this scenario. Every time you go for a walk at night, it's always slightly more unnerving than you would in the day. The dark turns beautiful sceneries into terrifying environments where you can only see what's exactly in front of you. It's the same with the ocean. The open ocean fills our hearts with dread, and we can't help but think about all the possible things that could possibly come out and eat us. And so that leads really well into our second big category, and that's the fear of death. And I don't think that very many people can say that they're not scared of death. And I mean, this is really self-explanatory, and it does a really good job of combining our two major fear categories. One with the unknown in terms of what comes afterwards, but then also the potential for suffering. I can think of one major example of a pure fear of death, and that's probably with heights. Being scared of heights is a fear of falling to your death. It's not about the height itself. It's kind of why people say falling doesn't hurt. It's the sudden stop at the bottom that actually does. And so leading in from that is this idea of suffering. And whether that's emotional suffering or physical suffering, we as human beings want to avoid that at all costs. And we have this inherent fear of potentially being in situations that will hurt us. So this can be anything, whether that's the fear of being tortured to the fear of asking your crush out and being rejected. All right, so now that we've got the three general fear categories established, let's jump into a short little system of how do we actually face those fears and conquer them over the long run. So similar to the last videos in this series specifically of building a holistic life, I want to use some visual backdrops from my past in order to better demonstrate these ideas, as well as make it a little bit more interesting for people to follow. Now, what I'm going to use in this case is sharks. Now this is really interesting because sharks do very much the same thing as people do in order to conquer their worries or fears, and so it offers a pretty good and interesting dynamic because not only are they following the same steps, but sharks represent a pretty big fear for a lot of people. And so like many other things in life, the first step to conquering a fear is being able to understand where that fear comes from. Now, the first thing you want to do when you realize that you're scared of something is determine which one of those three big categories it actually fits into, or in other words, why are you actually scared of that thing? Only by figuring out why we're scared of it can we devise a strategy in order to actually overcome that fear. When sharks encounter something new in their environment, it could very well be a prey item, and most of the time it probably is. But that object could also provide harm for them, and if they get hurt, they may not be able to hunt as efficiently and might end up dying themselves And so they will often tentatively check out these new foreign objects in their environment from a distance before they will ever approach them, which is why most of the time, if you were to be in the water with the shark, they would definitely see you way before you would see them. Moreover, any movements in their direction or sometimes even simple eye contact will be enough to make them either stop their approach or even exit the area altogether. The second step is to face those fears in a progressive manner. Now, we've talked about progressions before on the channel, and this concept can actually be applied pretty well to dealing with fears and to being able to overcome them as well. And the idea here is that we're going to face these fears in small incremental steps in order to ultimately end up in a position where we have the experience and the confidence to deal with that major fear and face it head on. We have to remember that we're held up by the realities that we create in our mind rather than the reality that experience has taught us or that we can see and observe. And so because of that, we can reverse engineer our fear in order to ultimately overcome it. We can convince ourselves that more often than not, we'll actually come out the other side without any sort of harm being done, and it won't at all look like the experience that we've kind of come up with in our mind. And so it's the combination of knowledge and experience that will force the fear to dissipate or lessen rather than being able to overtake us and basically shut us down. The key here is really to just start slow and progress in a safe manner. Now, you're going to want to put yourself in scenarios that are potentially not high risk or that you have a good amount of control over in order to experience those positive feedbacks and those positive end results and build that knowledge foundation that, you know, more often than not, you'll be able to come out the other side completely unscathed. And so this relates really well to shark behavior as well. Once an object in its environment that is new to it is observed, it'll spend a lot of time kind of checking that object out, becoming more and more comfortable with it. So it may start with a fairly distanced approach, but over time, those passes will be coming closer and closer to the object. And the more time it spends with the object, the more information it collects and the more comfortable it is getting up close and personal. And so ultimately, after you've been able to kind of gain this experience and this knowledge from your smaller controlled environment, you're going to want to face that ultimate fear. And a lot of the times, this truly comes down to committing to it. Once you know that something is safer than you kind of originally anticipated because of the fact that you've been in similar situations and have been okay, you have to accept that at this point you just have to try and you have to commit to whatever that is. Because ultimately, if you don't commit, you're far more likely to end up with a negative experience than a positive one. Having been able to reflect on those past experiences actually give you the mental strength to quiet the voice in your head telling you you shouldn't be doing this, or this is uncomfortable, or this isn't safe. For sharks, after a while, they become emboldened and will actively approach the subject, spending a lot of time up close and personal. They'll often go on to use bumps or even exploratory bites to ultimately discover whether or not this object is something they can eat or if they should move on to something else. And so the last thing I want to talk about before we kind of end this video is the idea of how do you deal with a fear that gets reinforced by a negative experience rather than being kind of repressed by a positive one. Now, this often happens if you fail at something or you're unsuccessful at doing something that scares you. And the quick answer to it is you have to do that thing over again. If you fall skiing when you're first learning, you can become scared of that thing. But if you don't get right back on those skis and try again, the likelihood is that you'll bring that fear with you moving forward. And so this is why it's so important to immediately get up, get back on the horse, and try it over again so that you can leave that experience with a positive outcome rather than having the last thing you remember being something that scared you. So this is a great example of that, and it was from an old parkour training session where I went for a distance Kong and I slightly hesitated on the takeoff, and I ended up kind of coming short, trying to stop myself and slamming into the big block that I was using and ending up on the floor on the other side. I could get up and force myself to try again and go for the move over and over until I ended up being more comfortable and feeling more confident leaving than I did coming in. And so that's it. That's kind of my mentality towards fear and how to get over it. The truth is that we're all scared of something, but if we let our fears actually control us and dictate what we do and what we don't do, then we're always at the whim of the realities that we create rather than the realities that we're experiencing. And so for me, it's so important that I should never be restrained by my mind from being able to do things that in my heart I know I really want to try. Really quick to summarize, you obviously have to visualize and understand why it is you're scared of a certain thing, and then figure out a strategy in a step-by-step process to slowly expose yourself to more uncomfort before being able to ultimately face that fear, commit to it, and accomplish it, hopefully ending up with a positive result rather than a negative one. But in the event that it is a negative one, it's so important to immediately or as soon as possible afterwards get up, try again, and do a little bit better to hopefully get that positive result we're looking for. Now, before I leave, I do want to say that this video was kind of inspired by a conversation that I had on a podcast not so long ago that should be coming out in the near future, where we kind of discussed how do I personally accomplish kind of these riskier, more dangerous activities. And it was a really cool discussion, and I figured it should be something that I talk about on the channel. So this is more of a video in conjunction of that, and I will be sure to share that around once that becomes available. Please keep an eye out on the Facebook and Instagram pages for more information regarding the release of that podcast, and I really hope that you guys enjoy it. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and like the video, share it with your friends. If you know someone who's maybe nervous about trying something, share this video with them so that they can kind of maybe be inspired to ultimately go ahead and tackle that fear. And so with that, I want to say thank you very much. Like and subscribe as usual. Check out the Facebook and Instagram page, and I'll see you guys next week.